Have you ever wondered why it's been so difficult to secure a high-end graphics card or a PS5? Well, that is due to the shortage of microchips in the world. A perfect cocktail of events has led to the global shortage of microchips. What happened to cause this shortage? Will there be a chance that microchip shortages can be fixed in the near future? Stay tuned to find out why the world is running out of microchips. A global pandemic. Microchips are in just about everything that we use on a given day now. Cell phones, laptops, cars, and credit cards for online purchases. With so much usage and dependency on microchips, what is the biggest element that has caused shortages? One of the main and biggest reasons behind the global shortage of microchips has everything to do with the world still suffering from the COVID-19 global pandemic. When the collective world was told to shut down from going outside and leaving home to go to work, online ordering skyrocketed, with so many people sitting at home and purchasing things like computers and tablets for working or workout equipment to stay fit. The need for items that use microchips became so great that the companies who make microchips quite simply couldn't catch up to the demand. The fact of the matter is that there are very few companies in the world that actually make microchips. So when the demand began to rapidly climb, there was already a strain on the companies that were busy fulfilling their normal stream of orders. What is even worse is the fact that the pandemic forced many workers to go home, which also affected the companies making the chips. No workers means no one to man the machines that make these chips. The politics of trade. On top of the workforce being depleted as a result of the global pandemic, there was also the trade halting between the US and China that led to the shortage of chips being commonplace. One of the biggest microchip manufacturers in the world is SMIC, or Semiconductor Manufacturing International Company, which is based in China. Once the US decided to halt and place restrictions on trading with China, major companies with American ties that used microchips the most in their product began to find it difficult to acquire microchips for their orders. Tesla, IBM, Ford, and Apple all suffered as a result of the restrictions placed on SMIC during the pandemic. With microchip deliveries being halted, companies began to turn their attention to manufacturing companies to fulfill their microchip needs. Big companies such as TSMC, or Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, and Samsung were called upon to attempt to fulfill orders. But those companies were already producing the max capacity allotment for microchips. TSMC already makes chips for Sony, Qualcomm, AMD, Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, and even Intel. There would be no room for an additional need for microchips that would be halted by the restrictions placed on SMIC, but more bad news would happen with Taiwan. Severe drought and fire. Even with the mass amounts of microchips being made and delivered by TSMC, tragedy would strike and cause an even bigger delay in products being able to be made. The process of making microchips uses a great deal of ultra-pure water, so that way no dust or harmful particles enter the chip and render it useless. TSMC alone used around 63,000 tons of water every day to clean factories and chip wafers in 2019. Taiwan would then endure one of the worst droughts in the last 50 years in 2021, making it even more difficult for factories to continue to make microchips at the same speed they once did. On top of that, a fire would break out in one of the biggest microchip manufacturers in Renesas Electronics Naka factory in Japan. The entire N3 building would be wiped out as a result of this fire, which is mainly used for automotive mini controllers. Every car takes about 1,400 semiconductors to function, so the fire would be costly to the entirety of the car industry. Some tens of thousands of cars would have to be stored until they could get the proper microchips that would allow them to function. This added another major hurdle for chip deliveries to endure. Delays aplenty. The world makes about 1 trillion microchips every year. However, when companies caught wind of the pandemic and what it might mean for the economy, they began to pull back on fulfilling microchip orders. Each one of those chips takes about 2 months to make. The lead time, or time it takes a microchip being made and shipped, began to grow as a result of companies not being able to keep up with demands. Where once the unprecedented lead time for a microchip was 16 weeks, the new total would jump to a staggering 18 weeks. Once again, the high demand for microchips would cause major issues with big companies. Apple, a $2 trillion company that spends $58 billion annually on semiconductors, had to delay the release of the iPhone 12 by 2 months in 2020. James Lewis, Senior Vice President and Director of CSIS's Strategic Technologies Program, summed up the shortage perfectly: bad decisions, bad luck, and then increased demand. Put those three together and you have a shortage. Now that you have seen the events that have caused the global microchip shortage to take place, what happens now? Don't go away, because you're about to find out if the world can rebound from the global microchip crisis. Open source method to fix the problem. One way in which the world has responded to the shortage of microchips is to begin to think about ways in which this shortage will never happen again and can be prevented in the future. Should the pandemic worsen or something else happen in the near future, the issue is that many microchips are made by just a few companies in the world. This monopoly-like type of manufacturing has left the chip shortage in the state that it is. But what about using open source code to help the issue? Open source code is when a company makes the source code for any given product freely available for use. This means the source code, design documents, and content of the product become available for all to use. This decentralized software development model is meant to encourage collaboration. With as many modders and tinkerers there are in the world, having an open source code for microchips could lead to a great deal more companies figuring out how and being able to make chips that are desperately needed. Bigger companies may not allow for their source code to be given so freely, but what is the alternative? Not being able to ship out tens of thousands of products as a result of no microchips? This method would make sense for all parties involved. Finding used manufacturing equipment. Another solution to the chip shortage exists within the tepid world of the manufacturing equipment that is used in making microchips. The old way of manufacturing saw 200mm 8-inch fabs or older facilities that were being used to produce microchips. A lot of the world moved on to 300mm 12-inch fabs to make most of the cutting-edge chips that exist today. Microchips being overproduced in the early 2000s caused company mergers and acquisitions, which resulted in smaller companies no longer being able to afford a machine that cost 7 figures to make such a small amount of microchips. These machines would fall under the radar for most chip companies, and used equipment would sit there without being refurbished. That is where the solution lies. Should smaller companies be allowed to open source the code needed for microchips and the older equipment that can still be used to create these same chips, then there should be a mad dash to place this equipment back into the fold. Using outdated equipment may not be the most ideal situation for current chip-making companies, but again, it's either allowing orders to be not fulfilled or finding a way to use every possible avenue to get chip manufacturing back to where it was. Bouncing back. The world is now more than 1 year removed from the deeper effects of the global pandemic. With safer measures put in place to allow the workforce to return, the hope is that microchips will be on their way to being produced back at a normal level. The massive delays and work shortages that were part of the initial microchip shortage are now being dealt with in a grander way. However, many companies are at odd ends about when they think the global shortage will end. Most companies and experts say the microchip shortage will go well into the year 2022. Intel CEO Patrick Gelsinger says the shortage could last 2 more years. That is disconcerting news for the automotive and tech industries, but should the companies that make microchips wise up and allow for open source material to be released, the shortage may not last much longer. That open source method can also be applied to the outdated equipment once used to produce microchips. Collaboration is the strongest way for any problem to find a myriad of solutions that may not have presented themselves before. In the same way, the world came together to battle COVID-19, the tech industry must also find a way to come together. So, there you have it. All the reasons that led to the shortage and solutions to help alleviate the global microchip shortage. Leave us a comment and let us know how this has affected you. And, like us, how long have you been waiting for a PS5? Thanks for watching.